Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. It's no surprise to all of our listeners that one of the things I constantly dialogue has to do with contraception, especially with regard to the pill. And being a young husband, young father, I've done a significant deep dive into that question and the affront that it presents to the dignity of women in general. But joining me to talk about this from the perspective of a woman is Katelyn Walls Shelton. She's penned a few pieces about the pill. And most recently, on the Ethics and Public Policy Center, The Pill Revolt: Why Millennial Women Like Me Are Rethinking Hormonal Birth Control. Katelyn is a visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center's Bioethics, Technology, and Human Flourishing Program and a women's health policy expert. She's the 2025-2026 recipient of the Robert Novak Journalism Fellowship, and she wears a myriad of hats. She and her husband, John, live with their 4 young children near Washington, D.C. Katelyn, great to speak with you. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm great.
So, you represent a growing tide of millennial women who are realizing more and more that the pill, rather than do what it was touted to do, which is to liberate women, to free them of the shackles of society, kind of the Betty Friedan kind of narrative,
hmm
rather than do that, it's actually caused tremendous harm to not just their biological, but psychological and social well-being.
Yeah, so I was really interested in the growing number of women I'm hearing about who are rejecting hormonal birth control. And it's a really interesting horseshoe of people who are doing this. It's your conservative Catholics, but then it's also your fairly liberal, I call them crunchy California types who don't want to put synthetic hormones into their bodies. And you see this kind of nexus where both of these very different demographic groups are rejecting hormonal birth control. I'm actually Protestant, so I don't fit neatly into either of
Mhm.
those categories. And there are a lot more women like me who are rejecting hormonal birth control. And one thing that I found fascinating is that in almost every piece I read about these women who are rejecting hormonal birth control, almost all of them talk about women falling prey to misinformation. And I found that really annoying and dismissive of the claims of a lot of women that hormonal birth control makes them feel bad. It's a band-aid that doesn't address underlying symptoms. And then many women wind up needing or being told that they need in vitro fertilization. So they have to buy their fertility back. Uh, I just don't buy it. I don't think it's good women's health care. And I think there are a growing number of women who are rising up and demanding better.
I'm really glad to hear you speak about this, especially as I mentioned from the perspective of a woman. And if it helps, I went from atheism to Protestantism to Catholicism. So I've come at this journey from a myriad of perspectives, and I share your sentiments. I hear how, for example, when I was a Protestant, when we did marriage prep, our pastors would simply ask us, "What kind of birth controls would you be using?"
Exactly.
And I think the presumption was the pill was a safe method. Sometimes they say, I've heard some things, I have a few concerns about X, Y, and Z, but all in all, it tends to be safe. We know now that the growing body of research is also showing that from a physiological perspective, it causes significant harm to the body of a woman, and we're only just realizing this.
Yeah. So, one thing that I find really interesting is that there are not a lot of studies. In fact, there are no large randomized controlled trials on the effects of synthetic hormones during girls' pubescent years.
Mm.
Many girls are prescribed birth control in their teen years, in their pubescent years, where we have no research. And there, in some small research that we do have, it has shown birth control is shown to reduce bone mass and density in girls who
Mm.
are prescribed birth control during their pubescent years. That in itself is concerning, but what's even more concerning is that there are no studies on the adolescent brain or cardiovascular health, both of which actively require sex hormones for development. And animal studies show that exposure to hormonal contraceptives during adolescence has persistent effects on the female brain and behavior, but it's unclear how that translates to humans. I'm skeptical that it's good for humans, and I hope that studies will ensue. But in the meantime, I'm not taking it.
As you're mentioning this, I'm recalling a few heartbreaking stories of colleagues in the past. They were open about being on the pill, and then when they and their spouse decided it was time to start having children, this person went off the pill, and the first thing they realized was they just kept miscarrying. It was a
Mm,
series, and gosh, my heart broke for them.
hmm
And then they were just diagnosed with inexplicable infertility.
hmm
And you wonder because they were on the pill for a prolonged period of time. As a bioethicist too, I invite you to speak to this. There's a growing prevalence of that terrible mindset that we can mess with our hormones synthetically and chemically and expect there to not be natural repercussions.
Right.
Can you please speak to that?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, so
Hmm.
I don't know. I can't speak from a medical point of view, but I do have a brain, and it seems illogical that
Mm,
we would intentionally disrupt these sex hormones that are integral to shaping our bodies as they grow and change, especially during our pubescent years, and there not be effects. I don't think that there is any way that there are no side effects to hormonal birth control, no matter whether my mom or my grandmother have taken it for years. My mom and my grandmother both got breast cancer. So, I think it's pretty unpopular in the medical world to talk about the link between breast cancer and hormonal contraceptives, but there is a link there as well. The other thing that I'm really concerned about as a pro-life Christian
hmm
is the medical establishment's redefinition of conception. When birth control came onto the scene in the 1960s and they were classifying birth control with the FDA, the medical establishment redefined the word conception to mean the moment of implantation in the uterus rather than what most people still consider the moment of conception to be, which is fertilization, when unique DNA is present.
mm.
That's the moment of fertilization. All forms of hormonal birth control have the ability to thin the lining of the uterus so that if a breakthrough ovulation occurs and a an egg is fertilized, hormonal birth control can cause that fertilized egg, that unique DNA, that unique human life to pass through the woman's uterus without implanting. That's abortion. I think there are real questions there with regard to informed consent that have not been explored, and I expect that to something that we see more of in the coming days and years.
I know I'm opening up a can of worms here. We only have a minute left in this segment, but effectively, you're sharing with us, and we know this to be true. The pill is an abortifacient.
Yes. And if you search online, is hormonal birth control abortifacient? All of the official, quote unquote, official websites from official medical establishment organizations will say, no, it's not abortifacient. And so you'll think, oh, I can feel at ease that hormonal birth control is not abortifacient because this is a very official looking website that's telling me it's not. But if you dig deeper and you look into the way they are defining the word conception and pregnancy, they define it as starting at the implantation in the uterine lining, not when most people, and especially most Christians, think life begins, which is the moment of fertilization when a unique organism with unique DNA, different from mother and father, is present. And that happens, I want to say it's 10 to 14 days before implantation in the uterine lining.
My guest is Katelyn Walls Shelton, visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and we are talking about the pill and how there's a growing tide of millennial women and, frankly, Christians across the board who are seeing that this is more harmful than it ever was good. Continuing on the other side of the break, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Katelyn Walls Shelton, visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She wears numerous hats, chief among which is she's a daughter of God, bride and mother, and she and her husband John live with their 4 young children near Washington, D.C. We're talking about the advent of the pill and the detriment it has done to society and the lives of women. Katelyn, you were sharing earlier, and it reminded me of some of the experiences I had as an educator at the high school level, and it broke my heart because, as a male teacher, even though I was teaching scripture, it's difficult to be able to say this to your young female students because they openly share, I had acne. They're 14, 15. I had acne, and so my parents took me to the doctor, and so I'm on the pill right now, and it completely fixed my acne. It just breaks your heart because you don't have the place to speak into that within that school setting. But that's the way the culture has gone, and you get really concerned about what that's doing, like you mentioned, to these pubescent and sometimes even prepubescent young girls.
Yeah. So hormonal birth control is prescribed to girls in their early pubescent years for things, like you said, as mundane as acne or very painful cramps. It can be helpful, studies show, and anecdotally, not me, but I have had friends who have used it to treat cramps. But some of those friends who were treated with hormonal birth control, thankfully their symptoms were alleviated, but their underlying conditions were not. So some of my friends had, unbeknownst to them or their doctors, endometriosis that
Mm.
has caused infertility later in life. And if those girls, I want to say it takes on average 7 to 9 years for women to be diagnosed with endometriosis. But if that had been diagnosed when my friend was in high school and experiencing the extreme cramps because of her endometriosis, then she may not have struggled to conceive when she started trying to have children in her mid to late 20s. And so it's very common for hormonal birth control to be prescribed to girls in their teen years. But this is despite the fact that research shows reductions in bone mass and density. So you may get rid of your acne, but you may have bone mass and density loss down the road. And women
Mm.
are already predisposed to
Yep.
osteoporosis. So these are things that long term could affect women. And it's a band-aid. Hormonal birth control is a band-aid solution that it's not a band-aid solution. It is often used as a band-aid solution, but it's not a real solution.
Can you, if I may invite you to also venture into what this has done to the way modern women live? You speak to this not just as a millennial woman, you're a mother and you're also a daughter and a granddaughter.
Yeah, so I think in the Protestant context that I have grown up in, my husband and I now attend an Anglican church in Washington, D.C., but I grew up in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I don't think the Southern Baptist Convention takes an official stance on birth control, but it was very much understood that when you get engaged, you start on a hormonal birth control method before you get married. And for the purpose of preventing children in the first couple of years of your marriage. It's a really common phrase that you and your husband need time to get to know each other in the first few years of your marriage. Well, I went to divinity school. I studied theology. I had the privilege of having really good Catholic friends who explained Catholic theology of the body to me, and I read Humana Vitae, and I was convinced that God created marriage and sex for unity and procreation. And I can't, in good conscience, prevent a future life from existing. Um, by intentional means on my part to block that procreation. And so I don't think that I would have the 4 children I have today if not for Humana Vitae and the witness of my Catholic friends. And I really hope that the Protestant church can recover a really high view of the body and recover a robust theology of the body, like our Catholic friends have kept.
Well, I do want to say this, and this might actually shock or scandalize some of our listeners, but I know this to be true that even amongst Catholics to this very day, many people revolt against the church's teaching on contraception, and so there's a lot of work to be done across the board. I thank you for those words, though. Humani Vitae had a tremendous impact on my life as well. What about outside of the Christian sphere? You and your husband, your family, it sounds like you were within a circle of the Christian faith.
Mhm.
In the post-Christian or the nuns ethos, what do you think the pill and hormonal birth control has done to the social sexual ethos?
I think it has, people talk about the contraceptive mindset.
Mm,
And I think that the pill has drastically changed the way we view sex and marriage. Brad Wilcox at the University of Virginia has done a lot of research on the impacts or the decline in marriage and family and culture that supports family, a decline in dating. You see a lot more premarital or extramarital sexual encounters. You see less children. And I think that hormonal birth control, widespread access to hormonal birth control, has contributed to this idea, this changing sexual landscape
mm,
in America, but also across the world. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about, especially as a mother, is the impact that this has had on the way we view children.
mm.
And I really appreciate the concept of being open to life and open to children. And that doesn't mean have as many children as you possibly physically can. But it does mean being open to the idea of children and not talking about your family as being complete and not talking about being done. These are all very common phrases,
Mhm.
especially in the Christian circles that I'm a part of, but I think they're a concession to our secular culture and they're something that I reject.
I'm really, really glad to hear you say that, and thank you for that, the boldness of that witness. I want to invite you to speak into an area that I know you're not a scientist, you're not a doctor, but you've done significant research on the effects of the pill, especially since the female body doesn't process all of those hormones, and so it passes out of the body, and so it's in the system, it's in the ecosystem, it's in the environment. Uh, just given your area of research and some of the things you've commented on, do you think that has had an impact in anywhere from social health to just environmental processes?
Yeah, so I haven't done a lot of research on that front. I know
Hmm.
there are a number of people who have, but I do think, like I've said earlier, there are certainly effects that hormonal birth control has on the female body, especially long-term effects that we just don't know yet. And
Mm,
many doctors and people in the medical establishment will say that's just misinformation. But we know for sure that there are
hmm.
no large randomized controlled trials on the effects of synthetic hormones during girls' pubescent years. And the research we do have shows that there's reductions in bone mass and density. And in animal studies, there is evidence that hormonal contraceptives during adolescence has persistent effects on the female brain and behavior. So it's not clear how this translates to humans,
Mm,
but I'm not taking my chances.
yeah. Right. And I think that's about as wise as it can be. How can people find out more about your work?
I am a visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. I'm on X at Anna Kate Shelt, and I have a Substack called Technically Human. Would love for you to subscribe.
Well, thank you very, very much, Katelyn. My guest has been Katelyn Walls Shelton, visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. All of what she mentioned will be in the description of today's program. Do subscribe to her Substack, support her work, and make sure people know that this is a problem that it's not just religious people who are speaking about this for the sake of it. This affects human beings at their fundamental levels, let alone at our theological levels. And so we've been talking about the pill and the detrimental effects it has had on women, children, the family, and society. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.